Today marks approximately 1 week that Trinidad and Tobago, particularly northeastern Trinidad and central Trinidad, have experienced some of the most difficult effects of weather, and many households in Trinidad and Tobago, from the north coast through San Grande all the way down to El Socorro, across through the southern bank of the Caroni River, St. Helena, all the way to Mafeking, have suffered extreme rainfall. The measurements have shown that we had rainfall for 1 month in 3 to 4 days. Fortunately, the rest of the country was largely spared that deluge, but later on we did get some heavy rainfall in the west, in the Diego Martin area, which did cause some damage, but not on the scale as experienced by those citizens in the foothills of the northern range and in Mafeking, where the larger river down there has overflowed its bank. We have been accustomed to having, in the rainy season, instances of watercourses not having the capacity to hold the heavy rains that might pour in a particular area over a short period of time, and we have to wait on the drain off. We are affected by tidal rise and falls as well, because our main watercourses outfall into the Gulf of Paria, and depending on the tide, we can have fast runoff or slow runoff. So serious was this that we eventually lost the use of the main thoroughfare between Port of Spain and San Fernando for quite a few hours. But fortunately, the weather system seemed to have passed us, and we are now into a period of better weather, some sunshine and some drying out. But the areas that have been affected by the floodwaters now have new issues of cleanup and removal of mud to prevent dust from forming, and so on and so on. Today the cabinet met, and we had the benefit of the work done by the Ministry of Social Services and Family Affairs. And the data has shown that approximately 2,000 families would have been exposed to catastrophic flooding, meaning that the floodwaters would have entered their living spaces. And I'm not here talking about the roads and the drains and the yards and so on. I'm talking about the living spaces within their homes. Approximately 2,000 families would have had their homes exposed to catastrophic flooding, which would have created havoc within their living spaces, and there were many families would have lost their household items, whether it's stores, fridges, couches, had their clothes got wet up and muddied, lost our paperwork, books, and so on. So I think by now, given the very detailed coverage that the media had carried for the last few days, the average person in Trinidad and Tobago would be very familiar to the effects of that period of bad weather I mentioned. And we normally have certain kinds of reliefs available, but in this situation we had to review what is available given the widespread and extensive nature of the damage within the household and across the section of the population that was affected. Today the cabinet observed what was available. We have the $10,000 grant for assistance for household items. And I want to make a point here, because the behavior of some people seem to cause us to think that they don't fully understand the state's role in this situation. Some people speak about compensation. Compensation implies the fault on the part of someone or some agency, they were at fault, and therefore persons affected ought to be recompensed. That's compensation. It is really assistance, meaning that the rest of the national community understand your personal situation, the extreme hardship that families and individuals would undergo, and would come to your assistance by providing all that is available under the circumstances. And this assistance normally would be $10,000 towards treating with loss of items in the household, and a number of other small grants to treat with, for example, the loss of school books, clothing, and the number of children will determine how much of that you get and so on. This morning, in order to facilitate and speed up this process and not have this detailing of each household or each claimant, the Cabinet took a decision that it would be reasonable and affordable for the taxpayer in Trinidad and Tobago to fund each household that is deemed by the Ministry of Social and Family Services to have been impacted within the household in a catastrophic way, that household, if there are no children in that household, that a flat payment of $15,000 would be available to such a family. And if that family has children, where the children's needs, including like the books and so on and other things like that, that there'll be a flat payment of $20,000 to that family, which would mean that we can begin to get those checks out in those two categories within a matter of, by tomorrow. As a matter of fact, this discussion at the Cabinet this morning has caused us to have slowed down the process that should have taken place today. We had initially intended to have the first checks out today. The Minister of Social Services advised the Cabinet that if we stop the printing of those checks today, we can begin to hand out the checks tomorrow with these two new values of $15,000 and $20,000. In the case of one particular area, which is Greenvale, which is an entirely HDC development, it has an interesting technical side to it, in that the electricity is supplied to those houses by way of underground conduits, and all of those conduits would have been impacted by the floods. So whereas over and above what I just said there, the $15,000 and $20,000 grants for loss of items within the household, there are two other grants that are available to persons who can demonstrate that they have been impacted. In fact, three grants, one for $15,000, one for $20,000, and one for $25,000, to deal with electrics, plumbing, and damage to property. Because of the nature of Greenvale, and because many of those persons are HDC tenants, and because of the peculiarity of the problem, the HDC has undertaken, has already undertaken, the work is well advanced, we are advised. The HDC has undertaken to do the inspection and rectification of electrical or plumbing problems that may have occurred in Greenvale. So persons who live in Greenvale will get that aspect of their assistance through the HDC, with the HDC doing the work, which means that they will not qualify to make a separate application to the Ministry of Social Development for plumbing and electrical assistance. That will be done by the HDC. The Cabinet was advised that the HDC has undertaken, the Electrical Inspectorate, an agency of state, is inspecting every house to ensure that the electrical condition is back to normal, and any plumbing assistance would be handled by the HDC. So people in Greenvale will not be required to make submissions for electrical or plumbing assistance. They will get their $15,000 or $20,000 depending on whether the household is a household with children or a household without children. And this applies, so having put that aside for Greenville, and let me say a bit more about, I'll come back to Greenvale a bit later on, and other HTC areas. But the rest of the national community, for example, in Mafeking, in Carmen, St. Helena, Kelly, as long as they have been deemed to have been impacted in a similar way for losses within the household, they too will be supplied with the grants of 15 and 20,000 in that same category of household with children, 20,000, household without children, 15,000. And then the people who are in the HDC, like Oropoon and Greenvale, and any other HDC development, who are paying mortgages or rental to the HDC, further assistance or temporary relief should be forthcoming. We've asked the Minister of Housing to communicate with the mortgage agency to enter into some kind of a deferral arrangement until January, so that persons who have mortgages and liabilities of mortgage from HDC units with, I think it's TTMF, that the Ministry of Housing will enter into an arrangement with TTMF so that such persons can get some temporary deferral from their mortgage payments until January. And HDC will do the same for its tenants, those who are occupying by way of HDC tenancies, to give people a little more money to treat with their immediate needs over and above the grants that they will get. Outside of those conditions, all other persons who have been affected by the flooding, but who may not have been affected in that way that I've just described, in the catastrophic way, the original arrangements for grants and assistance remain in place. So, for example, if there's a household in any other flooded area, in Sangre Grande, in El Socorro, where they are outside of the two categories I've just mentioned, but they qualify to apply for relief for plumbing issues or for electrical issues, those persons can make the applications to the same agencies and get the grants that are available, and those grants are 20,000, 25,000, but you must have qualified for it by demonstrating that you were in fact impacted in that way. If you were not impacted in that way, well, then you won't be able to qualify for it. But once you qualify for it, it's available. So that is the range of assistance that we have available. As of tomorrow, people will start to receive checks from tomorrow. The Ministry of Social and Family Services have indicated that they've done, I think, 1,700 households so far, and they have some more to do, which is why we are using the figure of 2,000, because they think that there might be another 300 or thereabouts that they will do. But the checks going out on the work that they've done already will allow them to begin to make those checks available tomorrow. Right now, we are focusing on washing and cleaning the neighborhoods, streets and drains, pavements and facades, to ensure that the polluted dust does not become the new feature of the natural disaster that we've experienced. And many persons are doing it themselves. We have agencies in there, volunteers, and some of the state's agencies and groups like CPEP and URP and whoever is available. We use all hands on deck to make these areas clean and dust-free as quickly as possible. So that is where we are at for the moment. And I once again want to express my sincerest thanks and appreciation to our uniformed officers who came out and spent many long hours marshalling their equipment and their colleagues to bring, firstly, help from imminent danger of loss of life, then whatever else they did. So by the end of the day, we did come out with no casualties, and we have to be grateful for that. And I want to make something else very clear, because it's something that is it's very difficult to get absorbed by the population. The role of the ODPM, the Organization Disaster Preparedness, the ODPM's role is not as many people think it is, because we keep hearing the ODPM did not bring this and the ODPM did not do that. The first responders, if one backs up a bit, the first responders of the state are the local government bodies, chairmen and councillors and their staff in those corporations. Those are the first responders. But something has to happen for them to respond. But from a practical standpoint, your first responder is your neighbor. Even before the state's response gets there, sometimes your neighbor is the first person to hear your distress or to see or know of your distress. And if that neighbor is not also distressed, and on this occasion, a lot of that happened. So you would have heard a lot of people saying that before the state agency got there, their neighbors were there. That is what we expect. And the state agencies got there, and they worked through the night and through the day. And of course, over time, things ramped up. There are some areas that we need to improve on immediately. I don't think we had enough inflatable vessels to cover the large number of areas where the only access and egress were from water vehicles. I was out very early on Saturday morning, having monitored it all night on Friday night. I was out on very early on Saturday morning, and by the time we got to Kelly, or attempting to get into Kelly, big trucks could not get past the old airport, the airport entrance. And of course, in Sangre Grande, it was the same thing. Very, very large vehicles could not get east of Sangre Grande. So we need to probably prepare ourselves better with inflatables for the use of the Coast Guard and the fire service and so on. These are preparatory things that we can do better. In terms of getting foodstuffs and drinking water to people, I think we did that reasonably well. One of the reasons why I went out so early on Saturday morning was to make sure that those persons who during the night were going to shelter, to ensure that they were being fed. And by the time I got to the first shelter in La Hoqueta, I was quite pleasantly surprised to see that people were being fed an early breakfast. And that continued throughout, and we didn't have people starving. The area that I think we fell down most were people who were in the deepest water and into the deepest part of the community, where there was virtually very, very limited access. Access was limited to what kind of boat service was available. And many instances we got reports from the Coast Guard personnel who did most of that work, and others who worked along with them, that there were people who, even though their houses were underwater, especially persons who had multi-story units, that people did not want to leave their homes, so they chose to remain in the flooded area. And those persons expected to be serviced while they were in that condition. I do not think that we were properly prepared for the large number of people who ended up in that situation. Many of those persons were offered assistance to get out to areas where they could have been more easily serviced. Those persons chose to remain there. And I mean, I understand why, because even though you're in that situation, in many instances you are more comfortable in that situation than in a shelter. Because in the shelter it is such a disrupted environment that you're sharing a common space with maybe one or two toilets in a community center. People rather stay in their homes and maintain some element of privacy and so on, even though downstairs is flooded, because they expect that it will drain off and relatively quickly. In some areas that did happen. The draining off took place very quickly. In other areas that were closer to the edge of the rivers, that draining off didn't take place as quickly as we anticipated, or as they anticipated. So some persons had to stay a bit longer with water at their feet or at their downstairs and so on. All of this, I say to fellow citizens, is not reason for us to tear each other apart. It's reason for us to feel proud of how those who were not impacted responded to those who were. And there's a role for the state, and there's always a role for the others who are not on the state's payroll. And on this occasion, there's a lot of good that happened, and also there are a lot of lessons to be learned. I'm sure that when we examine what we have done here in this area, in this period of difficulty, we would be in a much better position the next time, because so much happened on this occasion, and so many things were handled successfully, that there are things that we can build on and areas of shortcoming that we can strengthen going forward. This morning also, the Cabinet instructed the Ministry of Works and Transport, which is the ministry with the Drainage Division, to immediately conduct a hydrologic investigation of the areas, particularly in the South Lahoket area that leads into Greenvale, to determine why Greenvale was so heavily impacted, and to determine what, if anything, can be done in terms of physical works to interfere with the drainage system there, to, if not eliminate, but to ameliorate and bring greater comfort to those persons who live in that area in the event of heavy rainfalls that we are certain to come again. Because we do have a rainy season in this country, and it will continue like that for many years to come, as far as I'm aware. And of course, to those who subscribe to the principle that we are probably experiencing extreme weather now because of climate conditions, we are to cater for more of it. So we are going to do an engineering exercise, and if that exercise comes up with recommendations that can bring improvement to the drainage, we will do those drainage works in that area and similar areas. And at the end of the day, we don't want to say that we have to expect flooding in the rainy season. But what we have to do is to do everything possible to minimize the impact of deluges that would create conditions where water is trying to make its way to the lowest point, as it always does. And if that lowest point is to the sea, and in instances the tide prevents outflow. For example, I think there's still some water in Manzanilla. And the reason for that is that the water coming down from inland in Manzanilla along that East Coast Road has to cross the road in some very narrow crossings that are built on that road. But more importantly, when it gets outside, if the tide is not at fall, if it's not low tide, then the beach sand brought up by the last tide blocks those exits. And then if we don't get in there with a tractor and open it, no water goes out until the tide drops. And then you have to wait for some of the water to drain out from the swamp, because the water is now higher than the road and higher than so that floods that stretch of road all the time. Last rainy season, we had some serious work done on that road, and we lost quite a bit of pavement. But it's the same hydrological problem. The water is coming from the swamp end, building up over there, and can't find its way out into the Atlantic Ocean very easily. So we have the subsiding there was much slower than anywhere else. So those are the conditions, ladies and gentlemen. And I did mention yesterday morning, that we have accepted very graciously some approximately $4 million of cash offerings from the three banks that we are very close to, which is the Caribbean Development Bank, of which we are a member, the IDB, which we are also a member, and of course the CAF, that we are a member of recent vintage. The management in those banks have offered us relief, and we've accepted that. The other kinds of relief that were offered were mainly relief and of concern. There isn't very much that we could have expected from our CARICOM neighbors in the point of dry foods and clothes and water and so on. We handled ourselves pretty well with that. And we are in the stage now where we are getting complaints about who's getting how much of what. But of course, this is Trinidad and Tobago, the land of the smart man, and I dare say the smart woman. that we are not surprised of any of this. But we have to make sure that the aid and the relief get to those people who have been affected. That's the most important thing. Those who have been affected are the ones who should be getting this aid, and we want to make sure it's getting through to them. And we want to get them back on their feet as quickly as possible. So if you have any questions, I might be able to respond to them. Yes, Jewel.
Minister, good afternoon. Just one or two points I'd like you to clarify for me, please. The Greenvale housing development, it would have been the approval for that and the construction began under, it would have been a P&M administration you were part of?
If my memory serves me right, when I was the Minister of Housing, I seem to have heard about that project. I don't think it was far advanced, but if my memory serves me right, that the conceptualization, because Greenvale is phase 5 of La Joqueta. For those of you who know the area, the La Joqueta housing estate starts on the highway. Immediately south of the highway is phase 1. And as you keep going down that main road, you have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Greenvale was phase 5. Right? But by the time you got down there, you were getting closer to the lowest areas and exposed more to the river. On this occasion, phase 5, which is Greenvale, was heavily impacted. And what I have been told so far, I don't want to talk out of turn, but I think I've been told enough of it. The reason why Greenvale was impacted so heavily is that the drain off coming down from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 from Arima at Greenvale between phase 4 and 5, in building the development, somebody, I don't know who, the engineers, the developer, they attempted to make a right turn on the water course. So an elbow was created in the water course. But so much water came down at such speed and at such volume that water doesn't obey engineers in situations like that. At that elbow, instead of making the right turn, there was so much water with so much speed that it climbed out of the elbow into Greenvale. And that is why the Greenvale residents will tell you how quickly they went from not being flooded to being in water up to their shoulders. Because as soon as the deluge escaped trying to make the right turn, it was all going through Greenvale. And that is why Greenvale, I think every single house is impacted. And impacted with great danger because of the speed at which the water came through to them and the height at which the volume is. And of course, south of them is the river. So they got it from both sides.
To that, Prime Minister, is at any point, whether while you were housing minister or any point afterwards, while you were in that administration, were you aware, was any issue raised about concerns of flooding, or even whether that development should have been built there in the first place?
As I mentioned a while ago, we try to find places to live in this country. And a development like Greenvale, or some of the low-lying areas in the Arapooch Basin, or even, let's take Kelly Village. Getting into a discussion now as to whether Kelly Village should be there or St. Helena. We're not going to get very far with that. These are built-up, occupied areas. What we have to do now, knowing that we've gone all the way so close down and Greenville have been impacted so seriously, at the level of planning, we now have to be more circumspect in occupying areas that are prone to that kind of flooding. Because we're still doing it, not just south of La Joqueta, in central Trinidad, in south Trinidad, in east Trinidad. I mean, I've been to Mafiking. Some people in Mafiking, their backyard is the river. So as soon as the river rises, there's only one place you're going to go, backyard into house. But what are we going to do? Go and remove all those houses? That's not an option. But if we're going to do a new development now, we will think twice about doing that. So Greenvale was trying to solve one problem, which is create as many housing units as possible, because the pressure for housing in this country is what is causing persons to occupy zones, whether it is high up on the hillsides, generating landslides, in the watercourses, preventing access to cleaning some of them, in ponds, which are natural detention ponds, which will be flooded when the river overflows. So these are all issues of our occupancy of the island. And what we have to do is just be more cautious as we go forward in that. I mean, I've heard it said that we should never have built in Greenvale. Okay, one can say that, fine. But what about Sangre Grande? Are you going to say we never should have built in Sangre Grande? That might be so, but that's not a reasonable place. When I got to Sangre Grande on Saturday morning, Sangre Grande was surrounded by rivers pouring water into the town, because the Arapuch River was flooding from that side, and the Kunapu River was flooding from that side, and the water was pouring across the town of Sangre Grande. It doesn't happen every year, every 10 years, but on this occasion, there was just so much water in the rivers that water doesn't flow uphill. It flows down. And down on that morning was through the town of Sangre Grande. And I remember when in the 60s, I think it was, when Diamond Vale, there's one river going through Diamond Vale, the Martin River, but there was so much water north of Diamond Vale that when it passed through the new Diamond Vale development, it was Diamond Vale in ruins. You're all too young to know that. But we don't say now that we shouldn't build in Diamond Vale or we should leave Diamond Vale. So we have to treat it our problems and try and make the best of what we have as the physiography of our islands.
As you mentioned, the response in areas such as Greenvale, for example, we had visited Waiko Terminal. I had interviewed a resident there who had said, as of Monday when we spoke with her, there was no presence or response of any state agency or regional corporation. And I just got a message from them a short time ago saying, as of now, they still have not gotten that kind of state response in Waiko Terminal. And that there's also a piece of the road that leads from Sangre Grande to there. We saw that it's basically now one lane because of some issue of a collapse. It may have happened before the flooding, but it seems to be getting worse.
Well, I don't know that, let me put it differently, because I don't want to be misquoted and misread. It is quite possible and expected that there might be a few people who are still in a situation where the fingers of the agencies have not touched them. But the gross picture of taking aid to people in those communities, I think most of that would have been done. So if there are people who are in that situation, I'm sure the media has been doing a very good job in carrying their complaints on the airwaves, and the agencies, both local government and other agencies, would know where we have people who have not been serviced. Right? And as soon as that is known, the attitude is to try and respond to those persons. So I don't know that I can tell you more than that. With respect to engineering issues of the integrity of road surfaces and bridges and so on, as the water drains off, the Ministry of Works is doing an ongoing inspection of the infrastructure, and engineering responses will come. But in the meantime, if it's reduced to one lane safely, we will use one lane for a little while until we address the issue. If it's underwater, we can't do anything. So it's a period of patience, but diligence.
You talked about the fact that residents were reluctant in some instances to leave their homes.
Most residents are reluctant to leave their home. Only if they're in dire straits. If you notice, I said there might be 2,000 houses impacted, and I think the number of persons in shelters might have been a few hundred.
Now, there has been the criticism that perhaps the enforcing of the Disaster Measures Act, where you can forcibly take people from situations where they are in danger and are reluctant to leave, to save them from themselves, to places of safety. Did the government...
That situation did not exist. Remember what we have. We have rains, we have flooding, and we are dealing with the effect of the flooding. By a certain period of time, persons would have been making a considered judgment as to whether they were still in danger. During the night, many people were in grave danger, but by morning, the exposure to that danger would have been a little better known. And those persons who were in grave danger didn't require any legislative action or any forcing of anybody. If you had gone to the places that I mentioned earlier on, particularly in Greenvale, where people were in grave danger of losing themselves, the people who were in that situation, they all came out. They came out. A few persons remained in the household, and the Coast Guard went to them, sometimes on more than one occasion, and tried to encourage them to leave. But they chose to remain, but by that time, the water was subsiding at a rapid rate. So it wasn't as if the water was rising and they were in danger of being overcome by rising waters. By mid-morning, we all were seeing the water literally pouring out of the area. But we continued to provide them with support and evacuation if they required, and they came to shelters. And as I said earlier on, I've worked in these situations before. I mean, I spent many years in disaster preparedness and volcanoes in the Caribbean. And on every occasion, you would have seen, if there's a little piece of the house available, people choose and like to be in that situation rather than in a shelter. Because in a shelter, people view it as your privacy, your dignity, sharing such personal spaces. You'd rather be in your house, even if it's very inconvenient. And of course, there are persons who may not want to leave their belongings exposed to marauders who may interfere with what they regard as valuables.
I'm thinking in some situations, as we've seen like overseas, where people, they wait till it's too late to evacuate, and then they pay the
Well, we are no different, we had warnings here of a few days with the coming of this weather system. And I distinctly heard the ODPM saying to the population in areas which are prone to flooding to stock up on canned food and bottled water and so on. I am not hearing in the news broadcast many persons saying, well, I have stocked up and I did manage to get past it without too much trouble because I had taken that advice. And in some areas, even if you had stocked up, you might have lost your stocks because of the nature of the flooding that you were exposed to. If you only had a one-story house and you had 7 feet of water, you could have lost your stocks. But if you had a 2-story house and you had your stocks upstairs, well, then you might have been okay. Right?
I wanted to get to clarify what you said. Now, the handing out of these checks, 15,000, the flat checks, that is being given to the areas that everybody knew flooded out.
Not the areas, the household. It doesn't matter which area. We have determined the areas that were impacted. Mafeking, Kelly, Greenvale, St. Helena, Orapun. So we know the areas. So we now look at the family units, the household. Those grants are household grants. And if you had applied, and if you had got the 10,000 plus a 1,000 for the child and a 1,000 for the cloud, it would have come to about 13,000, 12,000 thereabouts. So we said we'll use 15,000 as a flat figure to the households that had no children, because where the children are, they are the only household with children and claim for books and school clothes and so on, right? So they get an extra 15,000. So if there are children in the household, 5,000. So they get 20,000. But if it's a household, say with 2 or 3 adults with no children, they get 15,000 because they would not have been allowed to claim for school books and so on, right? So,
show anything.
no, but once the household have been determined, once it's a household that the Ministry of Family Services have determined was a household that was impacted in a catastrophic way, then you qualify for the 15,000. So if it's a household that was not, if it was just some 2 feet of water in the road, or even 4 feet of water in the road, but it didn't damage your internals, then you won't qualify. And that guide has been done by the work done in the last couple of days by the Ministry of Family Services, who reported that they visited and can speak for 1,700 households, and they will continue to do the work until they get to everybody.
For finishing all these checks being distributed is what?
So for starting, I could tell you about starting, I couldn't tell you about finishing. As of tomorrow, the checks will begin to go out, right? And I expect that, as I've asked that the public officials who are doing that do so with great dispatch. The one thing we don't want now is that we've come to the stage of, after we come through the difficulties of the water being there, the cleanup being completed, that the support grants are not forthcoming. So you'll see quite swift work from the Ministry of Family and Social and Family Services.
Mr. Good afternoon, Urvashi from CNC3. You spoke about the report undertaken by the Ministry of Works into Greenville, the La Hockett area in particular. When do you expect the report to be handed in?
What report?
The report from the Ministry of Works into the river.
We've asked the Ministry of Works to go when everything, after we get water out of the way and people looked after and so on. The Ministry of Works will go in and do this engineering analysis and report as to what can be done, given what we have experienced and given the nature of the water of the drainage channels in there, what or whether anything can be done to improve our survivability.
Indication as to when they will get back to you?
Couldn't tell you that right now. It hasn't been started yet, but it will be treated with some urgency.
Would similar investigations be done at other developments, for instance, Urupun and also?
Yes, we'll do that. Where we look at all the areas that were impacted. Unfortunately, some areas it's pretty straightforward. There are some developments right on the banks of rivers, and once it's a situation where the river channel cannot cope with it, like the Caroni River has levees, right? We judge the Caroni River and we build up the levees on both sides of it, and that allows the river to carry more water. You know, you hear some self-appointed engineers talking about judging the water courses. If you judge a river as deep as you judge it, once the judge area is full of water, that's the end of the judging, you know. The water will rise above that because the water keeps going up. If it's not judged, then, well, it will flow over earlier. But if it's dredged to any great depth, that becomes like a well now, like a hole in the river. And of course, it will fill up first. And then if there is enough water to continue to flow in that channel, then that will not prevent the river from overcoming its levees.
Prime Minister, with respect to Greenville in particular, you know, even Minister Young described it, the topography as somewhat like a bowl. Let's just say an investigation is done and it's deemed unsafe, the development itself.
It's deemed what?
Unsafe for habitation. What will be your position then?
What is going to deem it to be unsafe?
In a high-risk area that could suffer similar flooding, because I've been told by residents that it has flooded at least 3 times previously, not as bad as this time.
Let me
but
just
each
say,
time it seems to be getting worse.
we have many other areas in Trinidad, much larger than Greenvale, that are more exposed to flooding. So if one is saying that, well, Greenvale is uninhabitable, and we use that yardstick, well, we have many, many other areas that we'll have to evacuate, and then the question arises, evacuate to where?
I know you did speak about the distinction between the private developments and also, well, government housing. I suppose we do, as citizens, you do expect the government to provide housing, but also safe housing. I guess that's why all the questions are coming up now as to whether or not the development should have been condemned. Is it in that same position? Did engineers foresee something? Did they foresee this?
As I just said, virtually everywhere in Trinidad and Tobago is subject to some kind of hazard. In this case, flooding hazard. We would sensibly want to occupy areas that are not too flood prone. I can't even say flood prone, because the entire Caroni Plain is subject. The reason why it is the Caroni Plain is the Caroni River Plain, the Orofruit River Plain. It's only on political platforms you hear them talking about water courses as though it's a channel that water always goes through. If you look at the geography of our islands, every single river is where it is because it claims that space every so often. Sometimes once every 20, 30, 40 years. But wherever it is in that valley, that is the river's domain. And you can make adjustments to the engineering, you can make things, you could do so. But the bottom line is, if you say we should not occupy areas that are exposed to those hazards, then there'll be precious little area in this country that you can say this area is safe, because safe then becomes relative. People on the hillsides in Maraval, they are exposed to landslides. In fact, I have a friend in Maraval who lives below the hill, and I know in that hill that there are 10-ton boulders and 2-ton boulders that one day will make their way down to the bottom of the valley. And if on the way down it encounters a house or two, there will be no match for a boulder rolling down that hill. So landslides, floods, lightning, blizzards, earthquakes, these are natural hazards wherever you live. And you just have to manage your hazards. And you start by managing it. In the case of flooding, if you go into an area where you think the flooding is most likely to happen, then you have to think twice whether you want to occupy it or not. And if you occupy it, there are risks involved, and the risk may be a risk that might be exposed once every decade, once every 25 years. So persons who study these things, you look at the frequency with which they occur, and you may find that your exposure in your motor vehicle on the highway is a greater hazard to you than the place you live. More people have been killed in this country in luxury vehicles than in floods.
We now look at the role of town and country, and should they be given more authority to deal with situations?
They have a lot of authority. What we don't have is enforcement. I mean, for unplanned settlements. But in this particular case, we see even where you have planned settlements, you can have these kinds of problems developing. And your question is quite valid, whether in fact we should have. But that's hindsight. I mean, when we wanted to provide houses for 100,000 people, the first thing that comes to mind is, where do you find the land? And that's why this phase 5 in La Hoqueta tried to solve that problem. We found some land there to give us another 400 houses. Because the big problem with housing in Trinidad is that there isn't enough land easily available to meet the needs, the demands. So the public sector is working on it, and private sector persons, they too want to use their land for housing for development, and Town and Country does have a say. And at the end of the day, they choose certain areas, taking all things into consideration, whether it is steep in some areas, whether it is flat in some areas, whether it is close to a river that might flood in 20 years' time, or whether in an earthquake, the attenuation of earthquake waves would be greatest. Otherwise, we'd never build in West Moorings, because these are areas that in an earthquake will perform worse than other areas in the country. So these are all considerations for which there are no clear answer, no clear cut. Don't do this, don't do that. It's a balance that you have to take into account. A balance.
Previously, just one more, Minister Stuart Young did quote 3,500 homes. Today, you spoke to 2,000. Is it that only 2,000 are catastrophically hit?
Yeah, as of now, Minister Young may want to clarify what his number was. I didn't hear that number. But I'm speaking to those houses that we deem to have suffered internal catastrophic loss.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I was very careful when we were quoting those figures that we estimate it could be up to 3,500 households. We estimated the number of persons that could be affected at 120,000. And what we're doing now is we're dealing with the data coming back to us from those who have gone out and assessed. The data, as the Prime Minister has indicated this morning, continues to go up. I mean, this morning, we've sent out more persons in the field. There are 200 recruits from the municipal police, persons who are in recruit that we're training this morning to go out and help social development with assessment, etc. So it is a moving number, and we've always said that at every press conference, that these are estimates. What the Prime Minister is dealing with now is those who have been assessed, and we expect that number to continue upwards.
And I want to say it again. Because there was flood in your area does not mean that you have experienced catastrophic loss. Understand what I'm saying? The fact that there might have been flooding in your street or on your ground floor does not mean, it all depends on the nature, right? If the ground floor was an apartment, a housing unit, then you would have suffered loss in there. If it was pillars and an open space where nobody lived, but you might have lost a cot or a hammock, that's a different story. So we are making assessments of the impact by household, and then you qualify based on what happened to your household.
Has the government set aside? I know 25 million was the first figure, but then there was
yes, but let me tell you people in the media something. I choose my words very carefully, especially when I allow it to come out of the Prime Minister's office. If you go back to the original statement that came from the Prime Minister's office, it said an initial sum of 25 million. That word initial means that it may go to another figure. Because if 25 million isn't enough, what you're hearing from me now is a commitment to, if we're using the R6 that we use, we will make adjustments to be able to do what I said we just do there, to provide those sums of money. It appears as though we may need a little more than 25 million.
Yes, you did say the figure $4 million from the IDB, this Caribbean Development Bank. Is this US or TT?
TT, sir. If it was US, we would have been very happy. It's $200,000 a bank. That's a 1.3 million apiece. So if we say, all right, the government, and that 25 million is specific to the impact of the flood. It does not eliminate what has been in the budget that we carry for the rest of the year for incidentals, right? So this 25 million is a special allocation specifically to treat with the impact of this flood. And of course, if we get 4 million from the banks, that's 4 million more, that's 29 million. And for the time being, from what we're seeing and what we're calculating, that should take us, if not the whole way, almost the whole way.
Dr. Rowley, to follow up a question from my colleague regarding the town and country's question now arises about new building codes, if the government should recommend new building codes for building houses in certain areas to accommodate floodings and things like that.
The Town and Country Planning Department is specifically funded and operated for that kind of purpose. We don't have to begin to invent the wheel here now. Building codes, yes. We can have codes for wind damage, for earthquake damage, for engineering strength of buildings and so on. So the phrase building code is a very, very broad phrase, meaning fit for purpose. Right? The Town and Country Planning Department has, I would say, if not all, most of the regulatory muscle that it has. The problem that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, in most instances, is enforcement, an absence of enforcement. But even where you have planned developments, that does not prevent you from time to time from suffering losses of this kind. Because Diamond Vale was a planned development. There are pieces of planned development in central Trinidad, in South Trinidad, in a classic case here of Laukata South in Greenvale. So it is more what you make use of and how you experience things there. It doesn't happen every day. I don't expect that we'll get this kind of flood, you know. And for those of us who are a little familiar with the situation, this looks very much like something like a 10 or 20-year flood, because it was very, very different to what we've been accustomed to. And if most persons will say, if I could occupy this area, and for 20 years I don't have a problem, and one day there's a flood, I may not want to give the area up, because then you'll find very few areas in Trinidad that you can occupy with the safety absolute safe knowledge that nothing will ever happen to you.
You mentioned that the main problem that we face is lack of enforcement. How are you going to ensure that enforcement is in?
But I was careful to point out, even where you have planned developments, where you comply with the approvals and you granted approval to build, so therefore there's no enforcement issue there. But we do have across Trinidad a lot of issues of unplanned developments where this kind of outcome, right, could be equally devastating.
Many offers from outside of let's say from the European Union or the United States or so?
No. The United States did indicate that they, again, let me make it very clear. The United States indicated that that they're standing by. You interpret that, they take note of our difficulty, and I'm sure, they understand that we understand what they mean. They're commiserating with us, but there was no real offer of any specific, and I'm told that the Canadians did also mention. And these are diplomatic courtesies, right? We do it all the time. I mean, every day I go to the office, I sign a document to some country where every time you hear on the news that something happened in the Philippines or in Belgium, Trinidad and Tobago sends a commissary note indicating to the authorities there that we are with you in this. But we're not on the battlefield. We're just indicating that we understand your suffering and we share your pain. I mean, Dominica called up very early. But there isn't very much that we could reasonably have expected from Dominica at this point in time. But they were, as part of the diplomatic courtesies and our brotherly love, they were early in the line to indicate to Trinidad and Tobago that if there is anything we can do, call on us. Right? And I appreciate that very much, and we thank them all for their expression of concern. It was Venezuela, Canada, the United States, Jamaica, they all, called in, and our UN agencies also. But by and large, the way, SIDEMA, which is the regional disaster preparedness body, has certain thresholds for disaster response. We were below threshold 1, which meaning that it ought to be handled internally. Maybe if it was worse, God forbid, then we go to threshold 2. And then, of course, if our magnitude 6.9 earthquake had flattened us, then SIDEMA would have, come in. So it's all there. So even though it was a very serious flood for us, because the rest of the country was not impacted in the way that the East was impacted on Bidder Central, it meant that the rest of the country could have come to their aid, and that is what kept us in category 1. Right? If the whole country was in that situation, from Diego Martin to San Grande, from Point Fortin to San Fernando to Chaguanas, if the whole country was like that, well, then we would have to count on Tobago. And Tobago itself had its issues. In that situation, we would have gone beyond just an expression of concern. And we most certainly, if you recall in 1963, when we had the Hurricane Flora, no, you wouldn't know that. Yeah. But in 1963, when Tobago was devastated, we had lots of offers of help from outside. But Dr. Williams' position was Trinidad will take care of Tobago's needs. And we did that. But even so, the Vincentian sent us a boatload of roast breadfruit, for which we were very grateful. But Trinidad was in a position to take care of Tobago's needs. Right?
Mr. Prime Minister, Julian needs some news. Just picking up on my colleague's question.
The trouble is telling you young people there, the media doesn't know it, but it doesn't know your country's history. You make my job so difficult.
Call.
Okay.
Physically impossible.
I was talking to the minister and other people like that. Minister Young wasn't even in school then.
Prime Minister, just picking up on the question from my colleague. Are there measures being put in place to tackle this issue of lack of enforcement with these unplanned settlements?
Yes, we do that, but it is not as consistent, and it is just a culture in Trinidad and Tobago that we don't like to observe regulations, and we like to get away with things. And we have fine-tuned and the concept of how you're going to demand that, right? Because anytime you try to enforce laws against people who either deliberately or otherwise breaking the law and putting other citizens at risk, you get a feeling that, a sentiment that, oh, you can't do that, you can't do this. And the end result is, when the worst comes to the worst, then you start saying, well, then we should enforce the law. But the laws and the regulations are there for a purpose. It's to protect us from eventualities. But some people take the position that, well, I will go as far as I can, and if I don't get interfered with, albeit, and sometimes you might even try to enforce it by going to the court, and you don't get the sympathy. Because again, don't even do the man that. You're going to break down the man's place because he, it's a house, you're going to break down the house. Right? I mean, I've seen, there's one particular area recently that was in the news about protecting a particular place that is sensitive environmentally. A lot of news on that recently, and the state was taken to court and all that. But I know that area very well on the northern side, and I've watched encroachment in that area. And after the encroachment becomes widespread, the state gives up and it becomes a community. And it's very difficult to, when you're a public officer, if you can't get that enforcement done. I don't know, you look east of the Wassa headquarters there. That was a teak plantation. Go there now and see if you can find a teak tree. In my own constituency in Diego Martin, we had a pine plantation. And on many occasions, you try to prevent people from occupying the pine plantation. If you go there now, we have a community called the Pine. It's Aningani. This is Trinidad and Tobago. But we really have to do better than that, because the laws and the regulations are there for a purpose. A purpose. A tree fell on a car on the Western Main Road in my constituency during this period of bad weather. Tree fall on a car with occupants. The reason why that happened is because an individual dug a hole in that bank trying to build a garage. And I could not get the authorities to stop it. You might say, you might ask me why. And I will tell you, it's not because it didn't indicate that the danger is there. But when it's being done, people don't associate the little action with the great danger. The end result was, about 4 or 5 years later, the area collapsed, blocked the road with a landslide, and a tree fell on a car with innocent people in it. They could easily have died that night, not knowing why they died, because someone did something that was in flagrant breach of the regulations and the law. But no corrective action was taken at the time when it was done.
I just want to, the president fell ill last night. Did you check on him?
I have no information on that, none whatsoever. I couldn't assist you with that. But I gather from what little report I have that she's okay.
Okay, the 4 million, has it been decided how it is going to be spent, which ministries, which agencies?
Not yet. I think 1 or 2 of the banks said where the money will go. But one I know sure. The other one said that the government will determine where it goes. But it's one pool of money. And I did see in somewhere in the private sector that they said that their money would go to the Red Cross or Living Water. Yeah. So different people are putting there. But the banks are putting it, so the government will determine where it goes. And of course it will go to the Ministry of Finance, because the Ministry of Finance is funding the Ministry of Social and Family Services.
I don't see the part where there's a breakdown as yet.
No. We haven't dealt with that. But we're going to spend what is required now. We're not going to wait until that money gets here. We're going to spend it. We're going to spend, we know we're going to get it, so we're going to spend, we can take it into account as we spend.
From me, any consideration, I know back in 2016 with Help for Haiti, we had asked the banks to set up accounts for persons outside of Trinidad to, to help out? I know Nicki Minaj, we have Winston Duke expressing solidarity, wanted to help out. Any consideration of something similar?
You mean for the government?
Make a
Well,
call.
there's a role for government and there's a role for others. If other people want to do that, then that's very welcome. But we don't think that it is the role of the government to set up any account in this situation. There's a role for the government, and we try to discharge that role, to its fullest. And other inputs are welcome, and I'm sure that other kinds of developments will take place. We stayed on the job from Friday night right through until, the agencies were hands-on and in full control. And all the government agencies that are required to participate, from all reports, they did participate, some more fully than others, but I must commend those who are actually out there in the water. The Coast Guard officers did a very good job in reaching people and getting them out of danger.
Can you say if the government will be assisting with the burial of Mr. Shadow, Winston Bailey?
I don't know that the family has asked for any assistance, and we have not assumed the right to bury him. Well, personally, I haven't been, but the Minister of Community and Culture, they are in touch. But we have had no request for assistance there, as far as I know. But if a request comes in, then we will treat it as such.
Prime Minister, another issue. The new U.S. ambassador gave his first address, public address at an American Chamber event that he had this morning. And I can read from you from this speech. One of the things he said is that although we, being the United States, as a government, cannot direct investment your way, that is towards Trinidad and Tobago, what the United States can do is partner with the government and civil society of Trinidad and Tobago to improve the investment climate. He then said things like corruption, lack of transparency, and needless bureaucracy are all factors that can make potential investment opportunities unattractive, which stifle economic development. The U.S. ambassador further said what investors want more than anything else, especially when looking for new markets, are transparency, stability, and predictability. There are many things we can do together in these areas to improve Trinidad and Tobago's investment environment. Any response, sir?
Well, I haven't heard the speech myself, but if what you've said there is a faithful representation of what he said, all I will say to that is that I agree. And I trust that the ambassador will use his office to assist us in all those areas that he has highlighted there.
He also said, unlike other countries, that the United States does not have state-owned enterprises that he can direct to invest in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's a good thing. He then said, for one, firms owned and backed by governments are incompatible to free markets. As we have seen time after time throughout the world, state-owned enterprises invest abroad in ways that are clearly not transparent, clearly not market-driven, and clearly not designed to benefit the people of the countries in which they invest. And Trinidad and Tobago has several state enterprises, and you can comment on that, sir.
He hasn't spoken to the labor movement yet, right? I'm sure he'll have an opportunity to speak to the labor movement, and there'll be different points of views there. Different countries follow different development models, and the United States is only one of them. There are lots of development models around the world. The United States has done very well with its model, and others have done well as. Trinidad and Tobago has a model where the role of the state, had we followed that dogma in the way that some people felt it should have been followed, much of what we have today or what we have done as a people would not have been done, because only the state could have done some of what we did in this country. And of course, there are difficulties with that, because after a time, the state's inefficiencies and improbables take charge. But in terms of developing a nation starting from the depth from which we started, the state would have had to play a significant role, and the state does have a role to play going forward, but it's not cast in stone, because there's another point of view which says that the state should do everything, or whatever the state starts, it must never give up. So it depends on what development model you're willing to follow.
Another question, final question for you. Rightfully and understandably, the focus has been on flooding that has occurred recently. But any update on the issue concerning Petrotrin and the restructuring of that company?
When I leave here, when I walk out this room, I meet with the board of Petrotrin, and I'm sure after that I'll be in a much better position to respond to you. But as far as I'm aware, whatever we had outlined before is progressing apace quite satisfactorily. Thank you very much.